English translation 684th contact. Part 1 Saturday, the 8th of July 2017, 22:08 hours.
Ah, you are already waiting. Greetings, dear friend, and welcome, Ptaah. Actually, I was expecting you on Wednesday or yesterday at the latest.
Greetings, Edward, my friend, and thanks also for your welcome. Yes, actually, I wanted to come here on Wednesday or Monday, but my work prevented me from doing so. The present and future events that are happening on Earth mean that I am busier.
I see. That's why Taljdeh and Lariha also came here. Both of them visited here recently, so I have met someone new again, which I was very happy about, of course. It is a pity that Lariha does not speak German.
Unfortunately, all the others cannot either, but they will visit you anyway, although Njana and Florina will be there as translators, but all of them also have a language translator each.
Ah, another surprise, but I do not quite understand it, because you are talking about others who will also visit me.
Of course, you cannot know that, because I have not told you yet that besides Lariha and Taljdeh, there are 8 other persons who have volunteered for new tasks on Earth, namely 5 female and 3 male persons. It has already been decided that next week Njana will introduce everyone to you.
Happy surprise, son, but I think it will be a bit crowded in my office with so many persons.
This has been considered, so a solution has been sought to be able to hold the meeting. You are going to be surprised with this.
Aha, so be it then. But I wonder why you are bringing so many people back to Earth now.
The entire earthly political situation has become extremely precarious again. Just as the exploitation of earthly resources and the complete destruction and annihilation of the entire ecosystem with regard to the land above and below ground, as well as the seas and inland waters, is also being pushed forward worldwide down to their very bottom in a completely irresponsible manner. And this destruction and annihilation is irreversible and therefore irreversible, because the whole thing has progressed too far and too extensively. For now, 37.6% of all systems have already been irreversibly destroyed in the aforementioned respect.
You have already spoken of this many times in private conversations. Unfortunately, it is useless if I try to shout the whole disaster out into the world, because on the one hand I can write whole novels to the media without them reacting, but simply throw everything in the wastepaper basket, while on the other hand I am still teased and insulted as a sectarian and do-gooder. But the insults do not cause me any problems, because rebelling against the ignorance and unreasonableness of the stupidly insolent brain amputees would only bring personal problems as well as sorrow and worries. It is quite enough for other human beings to get upset and freak out and go crazy over such things, if they cannot cope with the aggression, and in this way may still go so berserk that they cause mischief. But that is not my case, because I have a strong back that is able to carry a lot.
I know that very well, but I have often wondered how you manage to do that, because your behavior in this respect is not only unusual, but not everyday and somehow strange and therefore not normal-like.
Do you mean crazy? Yes, maybe I am crazy, maybe a little or more or less.
I did not mean to say that, nor was it in my mind, for with my words I wanted to explain that your behavior in this respect is humanly alien, precisely in a way that is incomprehensible to Earth humans. Because they would act in a completely different way, namely by becoming profoundly angry on the one hand, and on the other hand also by angrily defending themselves.
Oh, I misunderstood you then. But tell me, now that so many of you are here again, are they all zooming through the earthly skies again with their beam ships, whereby you can see a UFO now and then?
That every now and then there will be observations, I suppose there are possibilities of that. And of course they are not all out in the airspace all the time, because we have recommissioned our old station in, which you are not allowed to do, obviously.
Aha, news, but me keeping my mouth shut, that should be obvious. But look here, this article was beamed to us by Occam, and it says exactly what you said on the 10th of April, which I copied out. We talked about the following at that time. But as far as the poison gas attack is concerned, Assad denies it, which is why I would like to know what is really behind it. So the purpose of my long speech is also to hear what you have to say about your observations regarding the poison gas attack.
If Bashar al-Assad distances himself from this, then that is his right, because he actually had nothing to do with the poison gas attack. The whole event is based on a well-thought-out intrigue designed to dissuade Russia from its course of helpfulness to Syria. In truth, the whole of this deviousness and deadly intrigue was thought out in minute detail according to which this war crime was arranged and carried out by and. This fact, however, you shall not now openly state, because two great dangers would arise for you from it. And this was carried out in this way in order to achieve, on the other hand, to dissuade the unsteady and politically clueless U.S. President Trump from his Russia-friendliness and from his idea and his promise to no longer interfere in a warlike manner, etc., in foreign countries' affairs, but to put first and foremost only the United States of America in the foreground, a la America first. And these two factors, which run unchecked counter to his election promise in this regard, have already been suggested and reshaped in his mind in such a way as to run counter to his own words and wishes. This has not been of much difficulty with this man because, as a non-politician, he is in no way familiar with political intrigues and is easily duped by his advisors, etc. Those advising him know how to influence him through his feelings and sensations, and are able to direct him according to their will in his political imprudence, inexperience, and impulsiveness.
You then said that I should not mention the names of the culprits because otherwise there would be too much danger for me. But now this newspaper article says that the USA is responsible for the poison gas attack, which also emerged from your statement, although no names are mentioned. If you want to read the article, please.
Ptaah reads.
Poison gas massacre was staged by the USA Monday, the 26th of June, 2017, 8 p.m. hours, by Günther Meyer.
Professor Dr. Günther Meyer heads the Center for Research on the Arab World (ZEPHA) at the Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz. Source: Giftgas Massacre War, Inszenierung der USA.
The Trump show, in response to the alleged Khan-Shaykhun poison gas massacre on the 4th of April 2017, is a global propaganda success for the White Helmets. 87 human beings were reportedly killed by the nerve agent sarin in a Syrian Air Force attack in Khan-Shaykhun, in the Islamist extremist-controlled province of Idlib, on the 4th of April 2017. This poison gas massacre led to the latest turn in the Syrian proxy war. Shortly before, President Trump had declared that the fight against IS and the terrorists of the al-Qaeda network was the most important thing for his administration. Assad could remain in office until the Syrian people decide on the future of the president through elections. However, referring to the horrific images of dying babies, Trump then orders an attack with 59 cruise missiles on the Syrian airbase from which the chemical weapons operation was allegedly carried out. The USA, the other G7 states, and all other opponents of the Syrian regime agree: Assad must go. Relations between Washington and Moscow are reaching a low not seen since the Cold War. From the beginning, however, there were doubts about the apportionment of blame for this brutal war crime. As with any crime, the first question that should be asked is also, who benefits? Certainly not Assad. The troops of the regime and its allies were advancing on all fronts with conventional weapons. Why would Assad, whose future seemed assured thanks to Trump, commit political suicide in this situation by using poison gas? Damascus, like Moscow, denies any use of poison gas. Rather, a jihadist weapons depot was bombed. Chemical warfare agents were apparently released in the process. Western experts reject this account because, for technical reasons, sarin could not have been spread with such a high number of victims. This would require a targeted air attack with poison gas bombs. This is also confirmed by an intelligence report from the White House on the 11th of April, which, however, has considerable flaws. The French intelligence service researches more thoroughly and proves on the 24th of April unequivocally that the Syrian army attacked the town of Khan Sheikhoun with the nerve gas sarin. In contrast, important evidence from 27 former U.S. intelligence personnel who formed the leadership committee of the organization Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, VIPS, was largely ignored in the media. They called on President Trump to withdraw his accusations against the Assad regime for the use of chemical weapons. In doing so, they referred to statements by U.S. military personnel in the region confirming the Syrian and Russian version of the attack on a weapons depot of the Islamist extremists. The background to the alleged poison gas attack and the subsequent U.S. bombing of the Shayrat Air Base has now been published by Seymour Hersh. In the past, the well-known investigative journalist has been able to uncover scandals in the U.S. leadership time and again with the help of his best contacts in Washington. In his latest article of the 25th of June, he shows in detail how far the official government account deviates from the real events. According to the information Hersh had received, the U.S. military leadership in Doha had been informed days earlier by the Russian side about the impending attack in Khan Sheikhoun. The target was a building that served as a meeting place for jihadists. A conventional bomb with high explosive power was used, which was provided to the Syrian Air Force by the Russians especially for this attack. Since chemical fertilizer and disinfectants were also stored in the building, the bomb explosion led to the release of a mixture of toxic gases. As a result, the victims experienced symptoms similar to those caused by the use of the nerve gas sarin. The images of agonizingly dying children, which were made available to international news agencies within a very short period of time, immediately prompted Donald Trump to order military action against the Assad regime in retaliation for the alleged Syrian poison gas attack. Both military intelligence and the CIA knew that Khan Sheikhoun was a conventional attack. The president, however, did not miss this opportunity to improve his tarnished popularity. Under the pretext of a Syrian war crime committed with Russian support, he ordered a show of military strength with the use of cruise missiles in retaliation. A harmless firework display, as insiders called it, which caused only minimal damage after timely warning at the Shayrat Air Base. By contrast, the political consequences were far greater, leading to a reversal of U.S. policy against the Assad regime and its allies. This raises the question of how it was possible for the Assad regime to be blamed for the poison gas massacre in public opinion in most parts of the world within a very short time. This is where the White Helmets play a key role. As the Syrian civil defense, they achieved world fame for their heroic rescue missions in the battle for East Aleppo, which is controlled by Islamist extremists. They were even awarded the alternative Nobel Prize. A film about this organization won an Oscar for Best Documentary Short. Critics accuse the White Helmets of working closely with the jihadists of the al-Nusra Front, an offshoot of al-Qaeda. It is only with the support of the terrorists that they can produce propaganda films to justify the fight against the Assad regime. For this, they are financed primarily by the governments in England and the USA with well over $100 million US. There are numerous examples of propagandistic staging, false attribution, and recycling of films of rescue operations. They always convey the same message. Brave White Helmets rescue mainly children after barrel bombings by the inhuman Assad regime. It happens that the video of the rescue operation of the same little girl is used 3 times to document bombings at intervals of 1 month. In other cases, earlier footage of the destruction in homes and even a district of Gaza that had been bombed by the Israeli air force was used as evidence of the extent of the destruction caused by barrel bombs in East Aleppo. Time and again, the apparent use of red paint as a substitute for blood in allegedly injured children points to staging. In one case, CNN even had to apologize worldwide for broadcasting a video about the white helmets after it turned out that the rescue operation shown there was portrayed by professional actors. In Khan Sheikhoun, too, the white helmets were obviously informed in good time about the impending military strike. They took on the crucial role of ensuring the worldwide media dissemination of the horror of the poison gas massacre. To this end, videos were also made to show how the white helmets were trying to save small children with medical interventions. After analyzing the footage, doctors from the organization Swedish Doctors for Human Rights come to the conclusion that the alleged life-saving measures were obviously carried out in a completely incompetent manner by non-medics on already dead children, a pure staging for the camera. The latest alleged poison gas massacre fits into a series of other propaganda actions that only serve to induce the USA to attack the Syrian regime. In 2012, President Obama had declared that the U.S. government would respond to the crossing of the Red Line by a poison gas attack by the armed forces with military action against the regime. Only a few weeks later, the first reports about the planning of chemical weapons attacks for which Assad was to be blamed emerged in Arab media. Then, in March 2013, the first rocket attack with poison gas took place on the town of Khan al-Assal in the north of the country. More than 20 human beings were killed, among them also soldiers of the regime. Therefore, it seemed highly doubtful that Assad should have ordered this attack. A UN commission was set up, but under pressure from the USA it was only allowed to investigate whether chemical weapons had been used at all, but not who was responsible for the attack. After massive efforts by Russia, the Security Council finally sent a UN commission to also determine responsibility for poison gas operations. No sooner had the commission arrived in the capital than missiles containing chemical warfare agents struck areas of the Ghouta region of Damascus, controlled by Assad's opponents. Information on the number of poison gas victims varied between 300 and 1,500. A large-scale U.S.-led attack to destroy the military infrastructure in Syria could only be averted by destroying all chemical warfare agents of the Syrian armed forces. Based on detailed information from government circles in Washington, Seymour Hersh soon came to the conclusion that this had been a false flag poison gas attack. This was confirmed by another study by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. It proves that, contrary to the official statements of the U.S. government, the poison gas missiles were not fired from a military base above the city. The missiles used only had a range of a maximum of 2 kilometers, and must therefore have been fired from areas controlled by Assad's opponents. Against this background, in view of Donald Trump's unpredictability and his dissemination of fake news, it is more important than ever to scrutinize all statements from the White House even more critically than before, especially with regard to further developments in Syria.
This is interesting, but I do not want to comment on it now.
I did not want to, but what you said earlier about your work preventing you from coming earlier. I can understand that well, because I also have to be mobile and on the move all the time, because you cannot just hang around. Not even when you have reached old age. Doing nothing only makes human beings rot and gives them silly and stupid thoughts and actions that make them degenerate and fall into all kinds of addictions, which often also end in suicide. And while I am talking about it, it occurs to me that I also almost committed suicide once as a boy, but I did not want to do it on principle, but because I had not thought carefully about how parachutes actually work. So the whole thing was not intentional, but carelessly imprudent when I jumped from the ridge of the house with an umbrella during the last World War. What your father's Fath said about it at the time was that I was lucky not to have suffered a concussion, because such a thing was not harmless, but would in any case always produce more or less brain damage, which could lead to an increased risk of suicide. I would now like to ask how dangerous concussions really are, since they are generally trivialized.
Right at the beginning of our conversation, you bring up a subject that needs some explanation, but I would like to elaborate on it. Concussions are absolutely not as harmless as is generally assumed, as you say. Also, many earthly physicians do not realize that any concussion already causes abnormalities in various areas of the brain that are irreparable. That was also the reason why my father examined you in detail when you jumped with an umbrella from the ridge of the house as a young boy. Because you wanted to imitate carelessly what you observed in parachutists. We have talked about this before, at our 633rd official conversation on the 25th of October 2015, Pleiadian Contact Reports, Volume 14, page 357. What I want to explain now corresponds to our millennia-old medical findings. Namely, that even a single concussion causes the danger of suicide, while further similar incidents steadily increase the suicide danger. The normally rational human being is, if he does not succumb to a mental illness, suffer from fear or cowardice or an impairment of consciousness and become life-suffering and life-wearied, life-loving and life-stable, as a result of which he also never entertains suicidal thoughts. In the case of concussions, however, it is precisely such brain damage factors that arise, and even in the case of a single concussion, that suicidal thoughts occur, which are amplified several times over.
And it does not take much for concussions, after all, whereas many human beings do not even register such concussions. As Fath said, like when someone just hits their head, gets hit in the head with a fist or with a hard object. Or when, for example, in football, headers are made, a so-called header, as we say, where the football flying along is caught with a headbutt and kicked away.
That is correct. But it does not have to be such hard headbutts that cause concussions, as blows with the flat of the hand are enough for that.
You mean slaps, that is to say pats, etc.?
Yes, that's what you call these unreasonable forms of punishment. But they are absolutely not harmless and cause concussions, which, although weak, are nevertheless harmful and usually not detectable, but are sufficient to produce the first suicidal impulse, which, according to the earthly wrong way of upbringing, is usually followed by others and thus promotes the suicidal tendency. This is one of the reasons why so many suicides occur among the earthly population. But they are usually attributed to false causes, such as lovesickness and anxiety attacks, etc., whereas the actual origin lies in brain damage caused by blows to or on the head. So-called slaps in the face, as you say, which are carried out on the cheeks and ears, are also sufficient for this, but they shake the brain and thus damage it, namely by causing and storing suicidal impulses to materialize after a short or longer period of time. Many suicides which can be traced back to such origins occur only after the lapse of a longer period of time and even into old age. And as you said, all kinds of head shocks inevitably also lead to psyche and consciousness disorders, as well as to fear, cowardice, and weariness of life, etc. In addition to concussions caused by blows to the head, such as slaps in the face or head balls at football matches, etc., a kind of concussion of the brain can also occur in a similar way when there is a proper fright or severe and prolonged fear. In this way, thought-feeling psychological brain impairments are caused in the form of brain vibrations, which effectively have the same effect as blows to or on the head.
So then it is the case that slaps to the ear already produce weak or strong brain vibrations without registering them, as is also the case with profound fear and terror.
Yes, that's what I said.
Then each subsequent slap accumulates with the previous ones, just as the effects of fear and terror also accumulate, which then one day, just sooner or later, may possibly lead to suicide.
Correct. the resulting brain damage, which can take effect even in a small way and in any case, but the earthly doctors and other specialists can neither recognize nor are they educated enough to have knowledge of this. Thus, in the first place, fundamental thought-feeling psychemical disturbances arise, which express themselves in unusual and antisocial behavior, but also in indifference, work shyness, poverty of thought and feeling, as well as in faithfulness and bondage, alienation from reality, and in all kinds of fanaticism, and especially in all kinds of addictions, and that from material concerns to pleasure addiction, alcohol, drug and medicine abuse, and so on.
There are probably no medical studies and teachings about this. Consequently, the medical profession cannot know anything about it. Also, the fact is not dealt with in medical or psychological studies that there are mass suicides again and again, which are not fathomed by the sciences in their actual origins, although they have been relatively common since time immemorial. Also the fact, already mentioned by your father Svath, that suicide can be contagious and spread epidemically, is actually not known in the populations.
Yes, what you say is indeed the case in everything. But about the epidemic-like spread of suicides, it has to be said that the earthly sciences have recognized this problem, but have found it very difficult to deal with. Effectively, with regard to suicides, certain forms and circumstances, representations, pictures, descriptions, and observations, etc. cause suicide, promoting psychoses in unstable human beings, and also mass psychoses in unstable groups of human beings. In individual unstable human beings, as well as in whole groups of human beings, there is a dissolution of rational and volitionally controlled behavior, which pushes people to suicide, which is carried out as a result of a loss of cognitive, emotional, psychic consciousness control. This happens in unstable human beings for many reasons, such as direct or indirect witnessing of an effective suicide, as well as through films, pictures, stories, novels, emergencies, through simple accidents or mass accidents, as well as through catastrophes, through increased psychological pressure, through instinctual impulses, ego weakness, increased influenceability, as well as also through mass hysteria, etc. As a rule, unstable human beings appear completely healthy to fellow human beings and also to studied psychologists and psychiatrists because they do not show any overt mental illnesses, as a result of which they are classified as normal, whereas they are, however, afflicted with the suffering of instability, which, however, cannot be recognized by the so-called professionals because they are simply incapable of doing so. Only human beings who are cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, and consciously unstable can be at risk of suicide. But this can hardly or not be seen in them because they are considered completely healthy. But even in a life crisis, they have suicidal thoughts and not infrequently put them into action. The problem of suicide affects many human beings, both young and old, because young people and many older people are not mature and developed in such a way that they can rightly be considered adults in terms of intellect and reason. So they are also not stable in life and are susceptible to suicide as a result of instability. In this consequence, the reasons for suicide for all unstable human beings are extremely varied and in any case absolutely unrealistic. Susceptible, not firmly attached, but susceptible to change, fluctuating, unstable, and easily disturbed, as well as pathological, disturbed in thought, feeling, psyche, consciousness, and unstable. In addition, unstable human beings are sensitive, fragile, unstable, as in certain things also weak in character, unstable, subject to moods, and also fickle. As a result of these ways in an unstable human being, the will to suicide can spread like a plague in one or in many human beings who are also not extensively resistant to life. Therefore, even a single suicide can be effectively contagious, as a result of which a single suicide can lead to another or several or even many. It should also be noted that the intensity of the suicide perception is just as important as also the degree of awareness of the suicidal person, because this person is highly stylized as a result of his or her importance through a suicide, which is expressed particularly strongly in unstable and other worshipping human beings through thoughts of imitating the suicide.
I would like to say a few things about this and mention 1, 2, or 3 cases that I have recently read up on again, and partly also followed on television, and for which I have copied some information from the internet or Wikipedia, which I will add to my explanations, identifying them, of course. I still vaguely remembered one particular case from your father's explanation of world history, but I was recently able to refresh it on television, so that the readers of the discussion reports can also understand the whole thing somewhat. One of the most famous cases occurred at the time when the Romans terrorized Israel, whereby the former Jewish fortress Masada Hebrew HDTSM Masada fortress in Israel at the southwestern end of the Dead Sea was besieged, which I also know from my stay in Israel. Today, this part of the former fortress lies within an Israeli national park named after it, with the site of the former fortress being inscribed on the World Heritage List, which I understand was done in 2001, if I am not mistaken. Part of the Judean Mountains, Masada is an isolated mesa along the western edge of the Jordan Rift Valley, situated between the Dead Sea and the Judean Desert. It is isolated from the rest of the mountain range by a wadi to the west, and it should be explained that a wadi is the equivalent of a dried-up river course that only temporarily carries water after heavy rainfall, when there is a surprising and sudden surge of water, usually caused by heavy thunderstorms, although these can also occur many kilometers away, and in a wadi, the swelling waters come from a correspondingly large catchment area. Being in a wadi, usually with steep banks, can therefore be life-threatening. Wadis are not only found in Israel, but also elsewhere in the world, for example in Namibia and neighboring countries, where they are traditionally called riviers. The difference in altitude to the Dead Sea to the east is over 400 meters, while the slope to the west is 100 meters high. The hilltop of Masada is formed by a plateau, and the plateau was originally accessible only by 3 narrow mule tracks, as it was protected on all sides by rocky escarpments. Essentially, the fortress was built on the site of a smaller fortress several decades older in 3 phases. Within 10 years between 42 BC and 32 BC, the whole thing was commissioned by King Herod the Great, who was a Roman client king in Judea, Galilee, Samaria, and the neighboring areas. This Herod is best known for the infanticide in Bethlehem attributed to him in the Bible according to Matthew. He was born in Edom in 73 BC. After which he died in Jericho in 4 BC and was buried in Judea. His wife was Mariamne, to whom he was married from 37 BC to 29 BC. His children Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, Herod Philippus, Herod Boethos were also his successors. Herod the Great was one of the most brutal and cruel regents of antiquity, and at the same time one of the greatest builders of his time in the area of tension between Palestine and Rome. When he died, his funeral bier was made of pure gold, decorated with precious gems and covered with fabrics embroidered in different colors, on which the corpse lay wrapped in a purple robe. On his head he wore a diadem and a golden crown, while his scepter was placed beside his right hand. The whole thing was a funeral of immense and rare pomp and pageantry. However, it was not until nearly 4 decades later that this event was reported by a born Jewish historian named Joseph ben Jathitjahu. This man came from a Jewish priestly family, but after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD, he had assumed a Roman identity and henceforth called himself Flavius Josephus. He had made it his task to present Jewish life to the Romans as authentically as possible, although he had not been an eyewitness to the burial of Herod the Great. His records led back to the fact that, as was usual with him, he had meticulously researched everything and described the funeral procession, the lineup of the procession, the length of the route and the place of burial down to the last detail. There was only one thing that the historian, known for the reliability of his reports, had described very vaguely, namely the grave itself. Consequently, for about 2 millennia, no one knew where the tomb of Herod I the Great was located, until on the 8th of May 2007, the Israeli archaeologist Ehud Netzer finally announced that he had discovered the tomb. For 35 years he had been digging around at the mountain fortress of Herodium, but then the renowned archaeologist of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem found the tomb, namely in the eastern flank of the approximately 60-meter-high Herodium Hill, where Herod the Great, the violent, brutal, cruel, and dazzling ruler and biblical fiend, had found his final resting place. But as far as Masada is concerned, this fortress was considered impregnable in its time, and after Herod's death a Roman garrison was stationed there. The 300 by 600 meter large and largely flat summit plateau in the shape of a rhombus was good to defend and was also an extremely ideal fortress location due to its location and the good visibility of the access routes. Herod's orders turned the mountain into a fortress, for he had a casemate wall built around the plateau French casemat from Middle Greek chasma, crevice, chasm of earth, via Italian casamata vault. Casamata vault, or a vault protected from artillery fire in fortress construction. This casemate wall also had about 40 towers, and he also had a large number of other buildings constructed within the fortress wall, such as bathhouses, a commandant's office, warehouses, palaces, stables, swimming pools, lodgings, including a north palace cut into the mountainside over several steps. The whole thing offered a magnificent view over the Judean desert, and, with its northern orientation, the most climatically favorable position on the mountain in summer. The palace was built of limestone and decorated with wall paintings in the Pompeian style as well as numerous mosaics. The royal bathhouse was located on the east side of the entire structure. Large food stores were also built, which was necessary to be able to defend the desert fortress for a long time, and to be supplied with food at the same time. 12 cisterns were also dug on the northwestern slope, which were able to store several 10,000 cubic meters of rainwater. The water was brought in through 2 aqueducts. It served as drinking water, but was also used for the swimming pools and bathhouses. Decades after the death of Herod I, the Jewish war against the Roman occupation took place in 66 AD, during which the Roman garrison of Masada was surprised and captured by a group of Sicarians. Sicari means knifeman, knife wielder, dagger bearer, from Latin sica = dagger. The Sicari were a particularly militant arm of the Zealots, called in Greek zelotes, that is to say zealots, and in Hebrew yank kanai, the term being derived from the biblical person Pinchas ben Eleazar, a grandson of Aaron, who was a religious zealot and zealot for his God, with spear in hand. The Sicarii in particular carried out dagger assassinations, which is also where the name comes from. In the 1st century, they were a Jewish group opposed to the Romans and their occupation. Their preferred weapon was a dagger, the so-called sika. Afterwards, rebels from various political groups settled on the site of the fortress, and especially after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem by Titus in 70 AD Emmanuel Chur, after which the new occupants erected a number of buildings, including dwellings, a synagogue, a bakery, dovecotes, living caves and a mikveh or immersion bath Hebrew mikveh, hevkim or havkim, plural mikvaot, tovevkim or tavavkim from HVK flowing together, the water of which is not for hygiene but for purification from ritual impurity by ritual immersion. Masada was besieged in 73-74 AD by the Roman 10th Legion, as well as by almost 4,000 auxiliary soldiers under the commander Flavius Silva, respectively by auxiliary troops Latin auxilium help, which were auxiliary troops of the Roman legions, and which consisted of allied peoples or inhabitants who were not Roman citizens, and were recruited from the respective provinces. The Jewish Roman historian Flavius Josephus passed on the story of Masada's siege in his History of the Jewish War, Bellum Judaicum, 7, 252-406. The Roman commander had the Masada mountain surrounded by a wall over 4 kilometers long circumvallatio, which was secured by 8 forts of various sizes, the remains of the forts and the wall still being visible today. Afterwards, the Romans built a siege ramp on the lower western side of the fortress, which reached up to the walls of the fortress, and is still well preserved today. This ramp was partly built on a natural geological rise, which shortened the construction enormously. The Romans then used this ramp to bring various siege engines and battering rams up to the fortress in order to break through the wall and bring it down. The siege lasted 7.5 months, as Sfath had explained to me, which I can still remember. A frequently claimed longer siege period therefore does not correspond to reality, but to improper false traditions. It is recorded in the writings of Flavius Josephus that when the situation became hopeless, the besieged of Masada, led by Eleazar ben Yair, decided to die as free human beings rather than fall into the hands of the Romans. Legend has it that it was decided, a glorious death is better than a life of misery. So a few men were chosen by lot to take turns killing the population of the fortress and then themselves, which indeed happened. As a result, when the Roman soldiers stormed Masada, only dead silence and 960 dead men, women, and children awaited them. And as the story goes, only 2 women and 5 children had remained hidden and were able to report what had happened. The Romans, it was said, admired the courage and decision of the besieged. To this day, the suicidal act of the people of Masada is the symbol of the Jewish will for freedom. Then I come to the second case I want to cite, that of the Jonestown mass suicide and mass murder in South America, also known as the Jonestown Massacre and the so-called Jonestown mass suicide, whereby the partially forced suicide or murder of the members of the People's Temple sect took place on the 18th of November 1978 in the Jonestown settlement founded by Jim Jones in northwestern Guyana, killing 923 human beings. In mid-November 1978, a mass suicide and mass murder or cult massacre took place in Jonestown in Guyana, South America, which effectively shocked the whole world when 923 human beings committed suicide, or were murdered. The majority of all cult members had died an agonizing death from cyanide-poisoned lemonade, with many voluntarily following their cult guru Jim Jones, who was increasingly under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs from the early 1970s onwards, to their deaths, while other victims were shot dead. The leader of the religious sect was Jim Jones, with the village in the Guyana jungle also named after him. For his cult followers, who had followed him from the USA to the South American jungle, paradise on earth was supposed to become reality there, according to his lies and his confused doctrine of salvation, and with it also the dream of racial equality, social justice and loving interaction with one another, which, however, ultimately ended in disaster. This cult guru, Jim Jones, came from the poorest of backgrounds and his mother considered him a messiah, consequently supporting him in this way, which led him to take up his first cult preacher position at the age of 19. So the cult believers followed him first into the jungle, then to death. This was also the case with U.S. Congressman Leo J. Ryan, who traveled to Jonestown on the 17th of November with parliamentary staffers James Scholert and Jackie. Speyer survived injured, and together with journalists and some renegade cult members for an inspection visit. This was because there were increasing reports of sexual abuse of cult members by Jim Jones, as well as reports of unbearable working and living conditions, deprivation of liberty and torture in the Jonestown model village. Horrific images went around the world at the time showing nearly 1,000 dead women, men, and children in the Jonestown cult village, lying everywhere in the open. Effectively, it was one of the worst cases of cult mass suicides and cult mass murder in the new age of Christian religious sectarian human history, with babies also murdered by having the bitter poisonous broth squirted into their mouths. The charismatic founding guru of the People's Temple sect, Jim Jones, first threatened with words like, "If we are not allowed to live in peace, we certainly want to die in peace." Then he talked to his sect followers in a slightly sluggish voice and elegiac accent and announced, "Death is only the transition to another level," whereby the 47-year-old lulled the human beings and in this way tried to suppress the fears and doubts of suicide. But this did not make sense to all the cult members, So a larger number did not swallow the poisonous drink voluntarily, and thus did not all commit suicide, which is why they were simply shot dead on the 18th of November 1978 and thus became victims of their delusion of God. However, there were also survivors of this massacre who later reported that the armed guards posted around the meeting house of the agricultural cult Jungle Colony made use of their firearms and shot various of the believers who did not comply with Jim Jones's suicide order. And indeed, dead cult members were then also found to have been killed by firearms. What initially appeared to be an undeniable mass suicide out of religious delusion was later declared by survivors to be in part a mass murder, specifically referring to at least 250 babies, children, and young people killed. The cult guru, who mostly hid behind dark sunglasses, implored his followers to appease them, with the lie that the suicide and murder massacre was not a suicide, but a revolutionary act. Jones had initially tried to prevent the inspection visit on the 17th of November by U.S. Congressman Leo J. Ryan, together with journalists and some renegade cult members, as a result of increasing reports of sexual abuse of cult members by Jones, unbearable working and living conditions, as well as deprivation of liberty and torture in Jonestown. This failed, however, after Jones arranged a big party, which at first gave the impression that everything was in order and running completely harmoniously. After initial conversations on the evening of the 17th of November 1978, he lied to the newcomers and the U.S. congressman. There are people here who think that the Jonestown colony is the best thing that has ever happened to them in their lives, which was further confirmed by the cult members with clapping and frenetic applause, as they had been told. The next morning, however, shortly before Ryan's departure, the mood suddenly changed, because overnight various cult members had changed their minds. After which first a few, then more and more Jonestown residents asked to be allowed to leave the colony with the politician, his people, and the journalists. For Jones, who had been increasingly under the influence of drugs since the 1970s, this was a heavy blow and an unforgivable betrayal. Moreover, as a result of which, according to survivors, he desperately shouted to those who wanted to get out and flee, "You cannot leave. You are my people." However, when the believers did not spur according to his meaning, he became brutal and reacted in such a way by immediately threatening them through his heavily armed guards on the 18th of November and forcing them to stay. And ultimately, when the control delegation led by the congressman was about to board a plane at the sect compound, he ordered his guard team to open fire on Ryan and his companions, spreading death and destruction. The politician himself, whom a cult member had previously threatened with a knife, as well as 5 other human beings, were murdered with shots fired at close range. After that, Jones finally went berserk and further fueled the deadly atmosphere that he had long been fueling with constant fear, threats and menaces, and which he had continuously built up among his followers, creating a kind of doomsday mood. So it happened that when he had the control delegation shot, he fell into cowardly fear and threatened his believers that U.S. paratroopers would come and torture all believers, even the old and the children. So the whole thing degenerated more and more quickly, and so it could not fail that he and all his followers finally sank into collective madness. On tapes found among the dead was an audio recording of a woman who did not want to die, so she reminded Jones, the cult guru, of his earlier promise to move to the Soviet Union instead of committing suicide, to which, according to the recording, he abstrusely replied, "Yes, I will call there right away." After this lie, he forcibly drove the human beings to their deaths, constantly shouting in a voice quivering with excitement, "Hurry up, my children! Hurry up!" while the poison cups went round and round in rapid succession. And the human beings who drank the poison, survivors reported, dropped dead with foaming at the mouth wherever they stood or sat. One of the survivors later said bitterly, "This was no revolution, no act of self-determination. This was just a completely senseless loss." Then in the mid-80s, Quetzal once told me, the Guyanese government decided that Jonestown should be destroyed, after which it was completely burnt down and razed to the ground. Then I come to the third case, which is also just another in a whole series of similar incidents, all of which relate to sectarian machinations, the circumstances of which are known to me, whereby, for example, the following 5 cases, which can be found in Wikipedia and are not all known to me extensively enough, but only that thing with the Sun Templars, which was made public worldwide. September 1985. 68 followers of a natural religious sect kill themselves with poison on the Philippine island of Mindanao. August 1987. In South Korea, 33 bound corpses are found in the attic of a factory. The investigation reveals that a fanatical cult leader led the human beings to suicide and poisoned them. April 1993. At least 81 human beings burned to death in the estate of the Davidian sect in Waco, Texas. Presumably, the cult members set the fire themselves when the police stormed the estate after a 51-day siege. March 1997. The bodies of 39 members of the Heaven's Gate cult are found in a luxury villa in Rancho Santa Fe near San Diego, California. They had taken sleeping pills, alcohol, and an opiate. Apparently, they had believed in an extraterrestrial UFO when the comet Hale-Bopp appeared. January 1998. Spanish police intervened at the last minute to prevent the collective suicide of 32 followers of a German cult leader on Tenerife. A UFO was also alleged to have played a role in this. What I want to talk about now, however, is the matter of the Sun Templar sect, which has been going on for more than 4 years, and which took place in Switzerland, France, and Canada from October 1994 onwards, and which was also in the headlines of the media worldwide. The Solar Templars, French, Ordre du Temple Solaire, OTS, wore ritual cult robes with the Templar cross. This sect was a radically world-rejecting, internationally active secret sect, which was also called a secret society. In the second half of the 20th century, this sect saw itself as a modern Rosicrucian order, while also referring to the Knights Templar. As an apocalyptic sect, it attracted worldwide attention, especially when 74 members lost their lives in 4 collective ritual murders and suicides in 1994, 1995, and 1997. The Solar Temple sect, or Order of the Solar Temple, Ordre du Temple Solaire, Ordre International, Chevaleresque de Tradition Solaire, was founded by Joseph Di Mambro, 1924, 1994, and Luc Jouret, 1947, 1994. Di Mambro belonged to Amorc from 1956-1968, which was probably also the reason why the sect was counted among the offshoots or splits of Amorc. Amorc is also often written AMO, RC, and is an acronym for the Latin Antiquus Mysticus Ordo Rosicrucis, or Ancient Mystical Order of the Rose Cross. This is an organization founded in 1915 by Harvey Spencer Lewis in New York City, which sees itself as the successor to the Rosicrucians. In addition, it refers to traditions that are said to go back to ancient Egypt. The Grand Lodge of the German-speaking countries has existed since March 1952 and has had its headquarters in Baden-Baden since 1963. In the system of Amorc, it must be clearly stated, there are no equivalents to the apocalyptic special teachings and radicalizations of the Solar Templars. But since Amorc and thus the Rosicrucians must be mentioned, it is probably appropriate to also say something about this order, namely that the term Rosicrucian is sometimes also called and written Rosicrucian, whereby this order is about actual or legendary mystical and secret societies or secret societies respectively, which represent a doctrine of faith with alchemical, hermetic, and Kabbalistic elements. The term Rosicrucian goes back to a man named Johann Valentin Andrea, who lived from 1564 1654 and, as the son of a Württemberg priest, was, how could it be otherwise, a theologian, mathematician, and writer. As a writer, he created the literary figure Christian Rosenkreuz, deriving this name from Andrea's family coat of arms, which includes a St. Andrew's cross and 4 roses. The coat of arms was designed by Andrea's grandfather Jacob, based on Luther's coat of arms. In addition to Andrea, the lawyers Tobias Hess and Christoph Bezold were also the most important members of the alliance. Between 1614 and 1616, The first 3 Rosicrucian writings were produced within a circle of academic friends in Tübingen, which were also printed.
1. Forma Fraternitatis, the tradition of the Brotherhood, written in 1614. 2. Confessio Fraternitatis, the confession of the fraternity, written in 1614. 3. Chemical marriage. And regarding this matter, I have copied the following from Wikipedia, this short letter being written by André to Rudolf August of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. I have always been driven by an incomprehensible spirit to want to achieve and no more than was good for me. But in the meantime I have rambled through all the sciences, I have practiced jurisprudence and medicine, steered my little ship on the high sea of history and acquired 6 or 7 languages. How many libraries have I searched through? Although I myself possessed a library of 3,000 volumes, I have left nothing untasted that offered profane and spiritual education, and have also acquired knowledge of music and the mechanical arts.
I also found the following information about the Rosicrucian League in Wikipedia.
In the 18th century, the Rosicrucian movement exerted great influence on the secret society of the Freemasons. The Order of the German Gold and Rosicrucians, founded around 1760 in southern Germany, was Freemasonic. It was a mystery society on a magical, Kabbalistic and alchemistic basis. In the 20th century, other Rosicrucian communities emerged, for example the Ancient and Mystical Order of the Rose Cross Amorque, or the International School of the Golden Rose Cross, Lectorium Rosicrucianum Ni. Wien, founded in 1924 in the Netherlands as Het Rosecrucis Genootschap, registered in Germany since 1998. The Lectorium represents a Manichaean doctrine developed after Gnosis, thus teaching neo-Gnostic contents. It is a secret society. The main emblem of the Lectorium Rosicrucianum was already used in the Middle Ages for black magic conjuring of demons. The Rosicrucians have the cross with the rose as their symbol. Its meaning is explained in Essay 17 published by the German Grand Lodge AMORC. Based in Baden-Baden, in the following way, the cross symbolizes the human body with outstretched arms as a salute to the rising sun star. The rose in the center of the cross signifies the soul of the human being. To this symbol the Rosicrucians give the leitmotif, ad rosum per crucem, ad crucem per rosum equals to the rose via the cross, to the cross via the rose. Asterisk sun salutation, the sun was and is revered in many cultures, sometimes worshipped like a god. Ancient Egypt. There is also the sun salutation in yoga. This cross has nothing to do with the Christian cross. The Rosicrucian order's understanding of Christ knows neither grace nor forgiveness.
But now let us continue with the Sun Templars, or the Order of the Sun Temple. Formally, it was only founded in 1984 under the official name Ordre International Chevaleresque de Tradition Solaire. But the real history of its foundation is lost in various ambiguities, as are also the biographies of the sect's founders. In an almost impenetrable web of mystical temple traditions and syncretic esotericism, everything gets lost in an environment of moving clubs and orders. If the founder Di Mambro is considered, then he came from the French sect of the New Templars, in which there had already been an Ordre Souverain du Temple Solaire, or Sovereign Order of the Solar, Templars since 1952, and then an Ordre Renové du Temple, or Renewed Order of the Templars from 1970. Then, in the 1960s, Di Mambro made contact with Jacques Breyer, who was trying to bring about a refoundation of the medieval Order of the Temple in 1952. Then it happened that Di Mambro was accused of fraud in Nimes in 1971, after which he moved to Annemasse near Geneva, where he set up and ran a cultural center for relaxation and a yoga school in 1973. This was also the origin of his first followers, with whom he bought a house called Pyramid in Collonges-sous-Salève near Geneva. This was also the place and the building where and in which the Temple of the Great White Universal Lodge was founded on the 24th of June, 1976. Then, on the 12th of July, 1978, the Golden Way Foundation was additionally founded in Geneva, in whose name the community activities were coordinated under various names. Then the cult guru Dimambro succeeded in lulling the conductor Michel Tabachnik, whom he had known since 1977, and who then presided over the whole thing as president from 1981. At the beginning, meetings were only held for cultural events and spiritual lectures, but at that time, the Order of the Solar Templars already had about 800 members, especially from France and French-speaking Switzerland. The organized Sun Templar secret society had a well-thought-out organizational structure and knew an outer and an inner school, whereby those interested in the inner esoteric community were selected in the outer group, to which only a select circle was admitted. In separate cult rooms, Dimambro organized special rituals in which only members of the inner core group were allowed to participate. The inner cult rooms were modeled on esoteric French lodges. With the help of a sophisticated trick technique, Dimambro staged manifestations of higher beings during these inner ritual magical seances. He also legitimized his practices by claiming that he was supposedly acting at the behest of unknown superiors or masters in Zurich who could and would only maintain contact with him and no one else. Then, in 1982, the Belgian homeopathic Dr. Luc Jouret joined the sect and took over the marketing and management of the outer community, with Dimambro steering everything so that the sect believers saw themselves as modern Rosicrucian order. Members and were convinced that they were Rosicrucians incarnate who had to complete the work of their predecessors. So the Solar Templars referred to the Order of the Knights Templar founded in 1119, which was supposed to impart special powers and a secret knowledge that had come to them through occult means. In 1314, under King Philip the Fair, 54 Templars were burned as heretics in France for living up to Templar ideals such as loyalty, obedience, and strict secrecy, which also meant that the Sun Templars remained inconspicuous for a long time and were not noticed by the public. But I do not have to tell you what happened next, because the story finally led to the suicides in October 1994. 53 charred bodies of members of the Order of the Sun Templars were found, 48 in Switzerland and 5 in Canada, some of them having been killed by injections and others by gunshots. And as Ptaah explained to me at the time, the whole thing happened in a similar way to Jonestown, in that it was murder as well as suicide. Then it happened in December 1995 in France, that in the mountains southwest of Grenoble, the bodies of 16 followers of the Sun Templar sect were found, which had also been burnt and had bullet wounds. These were then followed by 2 couples and a woman in March 1997 in the 3rd suspected suicide of Sun Templars in Canada, but 3 children survived the tragedy. But I do not think I need to go into any more detail here, because I have found some important information on Wikipedia, which I would like to list here and add to my explanations. I have also printed them out here so that you can take them with you and read them through.
48 Florina has already photocopied the pages you copied from Wikipedia and handed them over to me, so I do not need them again. Of course I will read them, according to which you can paste those pages in the conversation, and we can move on to other things.
Aha, so Florina did the groundwork again when she was here the other day and did not turn off the computer again, which she was obviously using. So I'll add the Wikipedia printout as a citation, because on the one hand they are important for this case, and on the other hand they are very interesting in relation to the whole context. On the whole, they give a deep insight into the delusional sectarianism that has been rampant for more than 2,000 years, especially in so-called Christianity, and has been triggering unbelievable death-dealing excesses in human beings since its existence, not only among Christians themselves, as in no other religious sect, but also among those of other faiths who have always persecuted and murdered believers in Christ. Through the ancient persecutions of Christians and the persecutions of witches. This is well known, even if to the human beings of today it is only stories that they do not care about in their all-encompassing indifference. And this is still the case today when one considers the witch killings that still take place in various places and states, as well as the murder of people of other faiths, for example by the Islamist Ptaah, which hatefully murders Christians, Jews and Buddhists, etc. by means of assassinations and suicide bombings, as well as believers in Islam who want nothing to do with the Islamists and thus do not conform in any way to this ragtag pack. And with that, what is necessary has been said, so here is the extract from Wikipedia with the remaining necessary explanations, whereby I think that this Wikipedia information was hardly published so extensively in the public media, consequently the public was only fobbed off with short sensational reports.
Takeover of the Ordre Renaud du Temple and expansion. The second head of the Sun Templar sect, Luc Jouret, took over the might of the Neo-Templar Order Ordre Renaud du Temple ORT, co-founded by the French AMORC Grand Master Raymond Bernard, in 1983 after the death of its leader Julien Aurigas. Jouret transformed the Pseudo-Templarian ORT into a Rosicrucian secret lodge strictly oriented towards him, whose teachings were a potpourri of all kinds of esoteric, religious and occult sources, and were fed especially from the Theosophical and Rosicrucian directions. Officially, like other New Age organizations, the ORT advocated the Aquarian Age and preached charity, the values of true Christianity, and environmental protection. Internally, however, members were gradually confronted with a secret doctrine that propagated a light and power manhood as a training goal, and which thematized the Great White Lodge of Sirius, the seven beings of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and the servants of the Rose Cross. Jouret became Grand Master of the ORT, and brought its members into the Order of the Solar Templars. Through this merger, a group of followers in Quebec, Canada, also joined. This gave the Sun Templars a foothold in America. The order expanded its activities, especially into France, Switzerland and Canada, but also into Belgium, Luxembourg and Australia. In 1989, the expansion of the Sun Templars reached its peak with 442 members, 187 in France, 90 in Switzerland, 86 in Canada, 53 in Martinique, 16 in the USA and 10 in Spain. These usually came from upper-middle-class circles, were doctors, technicians or artists, in some cases extremely wealthy. Financial exploitation of religious motives in their idealism. The members uncritically followed their leaders' fixed visions of world escape and salvation and, in addition to their freedom of choice, also ceded their money and assets to the two gurus, who maintained a luxurious lifestyle. Unknown sums also flowed into Sun Templar activities that have not yet been fully uncovered. The heavy financial exploitation of the members was justified, among other things, by the fact that they would be among the 100 selected families considered sufficient to survive the expected end of the world and special enclaves estates in France, Canada or Mauritius, to ensure the survival of humanity. Even after the apocalyptic ritual murders of the sect, patrons were found who are said to have transferred over 20 million francs to the order. The regular weekly contribution was 200 francs. The motto was, "The richer and more generous, the higher the rank in the hierarchy of the order." This hierarchy was dominated by di membro,
and jure in an absolutist way. Those who could pay less brought in more work. Luc Jouret and Joseph D.I. Mambro traded extensively in international real estate, often buying cheaply and selling above value. Mind control, nutrition, purity compulsions and cultism. The Sun Templars were vegetarians, ate only organically produced food, were considered cultured and very gentle. The cult members took a holistic view of creation, and also saw the divine in stones, plants and animals. They tried to recognize the cosmic laws and principles of life, and to live according to them. Grace and humility were the central concerns of their doctrine of salvation. Mind control. D.I. Mambro, like Scientology founder Ron Hubbard, used a measuring device called a spectrograph for indoctrination purposes. This device had enabled 33 masters to balance the aura and swinging waves of all cult members. Through the deep psychological manipulation techniques of the cult leadership, collective delusions, losses of reality, disorders of consciousness, and childlike visions of paradise were formed. Conditioned by radical mind control, the followers of the order were driven into a deadly illusory world, into emotional regression, and visibly into an end-time neurosis. Social life and cult. D.I. Mambro ruled like a despot, and regulated the social life of all members. Most continued to pursue their professions. Many Sun Templars formed communities in mostly exclusive villas and country estates. 4 to 5 devotions with meditations were held per day, on Sundays often up to 8 hours per meeting. The working day of less privileged members began at 4 hours in the morning, and labor was extensively exploited. Wealthy people were induced to donate money. D.I. Mambro separated couples and families at will and arranged new marriages by pairing members into cosmic couples along mystical lines. The fear of impurity was deliberately stirred up. Numerous ablutions were obligatory. One had to protect oneself against Earth rays and other radiation, and strict food taboos had to be observed. Radicalization phased the Grand Master's pose as a cult superman. Between 1979 and 1981, Luc Jouret and Joseph D.I. Mambro took over the leadership of the Order of the Solar Templars. Both claimed a godlike position for themselves and surrounded themselves with the nimbus of being a cult superman. Thus, the homeopath Jouret was considered a miracle healer, and D.I. Mambro presented himself as the Grand Master of the Order of the Solar Templars with magical powers, and staged himself as the reincarnation of Osiris, Moses and a medieval night monk. Jouret developed an active propaganda and lecture activity, mostly on health topics. He appeared as a healer who demanded gratitude after success. D.I. Mambro worked as the mysterious Grand Master with magical abilities, who wielded the sword Excalibur, or directed cosmic forces through another medieval knight's sword. Teaching in relation to theosophy and spiritualistic Rosicrucian ideas. D.I. Mambro's writings show correspondences to the theosophical schools of Alice and Bailey and Annie Besant. The Sun Templars drew their worldview from all kinds of esoteric, religious and occult sources, but above all from the modern theosophy of the medium Helena Blavatsky and the same elitist Rosicrucian direction. which claimed to possess an exclusive knowledge of an actually existing, but just invisible secret Rosicrucian brotherhood, as whose earthly representatives they saw themselves. From Blavatsky they borrowed the idea of a white brotherhood, a circle of astral ascended masters who, according to D.I. Mambro, would have their seat in the actual command center of the Solar Templars in Zurich and on the star Sirius. D.I. Mambro and Duret repeatedly referred to themselves as incarnations of ascended masters, including Jesus and Moses. The syncretic doctrine of the Solar Templars was compiled by Duret and D.I. Mambro. It results from apocalyptic special doctrines and radicalizations that partly form the myth, which is theoretically based on the same thread of reception of Rosicrucian ideas, in which the again invisible, elder brothers of the Rosicrucian are mentioned by name as part of a supernatural brotherhood. In the Sun Templar manifestos, an esoteric reference was made to the Pyramid of Cheops at Giza, a great invisible white brotherhood, the Holy Grail and Arthurian legend, and expanded into a mixture of medieval mystery beliefs, Grail Christianity, astrology, New Age, rebirth beliefs and nature religion. Each member was defined as a reincarnation of a historical, or legendary personality, who had an old debt to pay off, or a function for further salvation history. D.I. Mambro euphorized the members by revealing to them which important personalities they had been in previous lives. Among them were the pharaoh Hatshepsut, the queen of Atlantis and the biblical figure Joshua. Apocalyptic teachings of salvation. The apocalyptic orientation towards D.I. Mambro's doctrine of salvation intensified as the millennium approached. While D.I. Mambro originally announced to the cult members, thanks to their spiritual way of life, a peaceful end-time transition into a mystical paradise, which they would experience in earthly form, the end-time visions changed radically in the 1990s. The consciousness of the members of the order was now increasingly marked by fears of persecution. Those who were spiritually developed enough would voluntarily leave the earth in obedience to the plan of the invisible hierarchy in order to enter the absolute dimension of truth in the Christian fire, and thus escape the fate of the destruction of the corrupted world. D.I. Mambro had with his mistress a daughter named Emmanuel, who was to be raised as a cosmic child to become the Avatar or Messiah. She grew up completely isolated. No one except the nanny Nikki Dutoit was allowed to even come near her. Her antipode was later seen as a little boy who was considered the Antichrist. Spiritualist impostures and sleight of hand. D.I. Mambro's daughter Ely, who later died in the massacres, publicly reported the sleight of hand tricks her father used to fool his followers about his psychic abilities. These deceptions and tricks were confirmed shortly afterwards by Antoine Dutoit, D.I. Mambro's closest confidant. Thus, the cult leader regularly captivated his followers with trick installations during rituals in the darkened sanctuary. When religious were initiated, he made bodily astral masters appear. He showed himself with a sword that is said to have once belonged to King Arthur, from whose blade he made lightning flash with hidden electronic devices. Under his black ceremonial robe, the cult leader wore a remote control with which he could secretly open automatic doors and trigger lightning. He could make the Holy Grail appear on a hill at the touch of a button. Turning into contempt for the world and crime. D.I. Mambro was under investigation for fraud, Duret for arms dealing. Both had long taught, death does not exist, it is only an illusion. Based on this belief, the strategy to survive the end of the world was now radically changed. Transit to Sirius in 1994, the inhuman barbarism of the doctrine escalated into the intention of being reborn in the star system Sirius after a collective death, in order to establish a new humanity there. Proclamation of the Rosicrucian Alliance, an announcement of a Rosicrucian journey. In 1991, the hardcore of the Order of the Solar Temple proclaimed the so-called Rosicrucian Alliance. In 1994, the Swiss conductor Michel Tabachnik announced during a lecture in Grenoble that the Sun Templar, Rosicrucians would soon embark on a journey. Just 10 days later, the bodies of 53 Sun Templars were recovered in Switzerland and Canada. 4 massacres in 1994, 1995, and 1997. In 1994, 1995, and 1997, a total of 74 Sun Templars died in collective murder and suicide operations. Some stunned and shot, some poisoned, some by their own hand. The legal offenses were murder, killing on demand, and suicide. After the deaths of the 2 cult leaders D.I. Mambro and Jure, Tabachnik, whose wife died in the 1994 suicides, was suspected of being the new Grand Master of the Sun Templars. Murder of the Antichrist Massacre 1 on the 30th of September, 1994. The drama was triggered by a trifle, the first name of a newborn baby. The couple Nikki and Antoine Dutoit, who looked after the 2 houses of Jure and D.I. Mambro in Canada, christened their son Christopher Emmanuel in July 1994. This enraged the cult leader D.I. Mambro, whose daughter Emmanuel, allegedly mystically conceived with his mistress Dominique Belle-Atten 36, was considered a cosmic child whom outsiders, except Nikki, were allowed to approach within 10 meters at most so as not to disturb her aura. Previously, the Dutoits had discovered the imposter tricks and secret light effects of D.I. Mambro's spiritual superworld. Thereupon D.I. Mambro announced that the baby Christopher Emmanuel was the Antichrist, endangering the spiritual future of the Order, and sent the Swiss Joel Eggers 35, together with Dominique Belle-Atten from Zurich to Montreal on the 29th of September, 1994 to murder the Dutoit family. In the Canadian cult centre of Morin Heights, the caretaker Antoine Dutoit was then murdered by Joel Eggers on the 30th of September, 1994 with 50 knife stabs symbolizing the 50 cult followers who were to die at D.I. Mambro's behest. Dominique Belle-Atten killed Dutoit's wife Nikki with 8 knife stabs symbolizing the 8 laws of the Sun Templars. She then stabbed the Dutoit's 3-month-old son Christopher Emmanuel, who had been declared the Antichrist, with 6 stabs and pierced his heart several times. Eggers and Belle-Atten flew back to Switzerland, and 2 other Sun Templars living in Canada removed all traces of the ritual murder and hid the bodies in a cupboard. On the night of the 4th of October, 1994, these 2 helpers took the drug benzodiazepine and set fire to the property with a timed detonator. Both perished in the flames. Massacre 2 on 4th and the 5th of October, 1994. On the night of the 5th of October, 1994, a total of 48 members of the Sun Templars died in murders and suicides. The autopsy revealed that 15 human beings committed suicide, 7 were executed as traitors, and the rest were helped to die. In a homestead in the hamlet of Cherry in the Swiss canton of Freiburg, the volunteer fire brigade found 23 dead bodies wrapped in gold and white cult robes, 18 of them aligned in a circle, as if symbolizing rays of sunlight. The bodies, including Tabachnik's first wife, lay in a kind of chapel with mirrored walls and bright red cloth panels under a painting of Christ. Some heads were wrapped in rubbish bags, others wore gowns. After the massacre in Cherry, Jouret and D.I. Membro drove to Granger-sur-Salvan in the Swiss canton of Valais, about 50 kilometers south of Montreux, where a chalet burned 3 hours later. On the morning of the 6th of October, firefighters found the charred remains of 25 human beings in the rubble, including 5 children and the leadership of Jouret and D.I. Membro, his cosmic child Emmanuel, and her Swiss mother Dominique Bellatin. Former member Thierry Huguenin warned of further massacres among the Sun Templars. Arrests and criticism of the investigation in Switzerland. Investigations began in Switzerland, France and Canada. 3 Sun Templars who had been spotted the day before the chalet fire in Granger-sur-Salvan were arrested. Patrick Vuillet, who sent the legacy letters of the sect leaders, and 2 French gendarmes, Jean-Pierre Lardanchet and Patrick Rostard. However, investigating magistrate Killer saw no sufficient reason for an arrest warrant and released the trio. Reasoning: nothing, absolutely nothing indicated that cult members I had interrogated would pick up the torch and carry out a new massacre. This proved to be a misjudgment. The lawyer for the joint plaintiffs, Jacques Barillon, criticized the fact that Lardanchet had not at least been monitored and intercepted, which might have prevented the massacres the following year, and accused the Swiss investigating authorities of misdiagnosis. Massacre 3 on the 23rd of December, 1995. On the 23rd of December, 1995, 30 kilometers southwest of Grenoble near Saint-Pierre-de-Charentes. 16 charred bodies were found on a hillside plateau in the so-called hellhole comma, arranged in a circle like the spokes of a wheel. The feet of the death candidates pointed to a pyre in the middle. Forensic experts found that 14 of the victims had been injected with an anesthetic, as in Cherry, before being shot in the head and set on fire. The bodies of the 2 group leaders lay apart, and near them the 2 pistols used in the crime. Even the defense did not contradict the prosecution's finding that the cultists were partially murdered. The chief prosecutor of Grenoble stated that the 11 Sun Templars and 3 children were shot by gendarme Lardanchet and an assistant. Black plastic bags were put over the victims' heads. Afterwards, the 2 perpetrators doused themselves with an accelerant and shot themselves with the gendarmes' service pistols. The Forensic Institute described the mass murder, bizarrely called transit by the Sun Templars, as a ritual bloodbath. Lardanchet's 2 daughters were among the 16 dead. Massacre 4 on the 22nd of March, 1997. On the 22nd of March, 1997, 5 bodies were recovered by firefighters following a fire alarm in a burning country house in Saint-Casimir, Quebec, Canada. 3 teenagers, who had been drugged, escaped from an adjoining house. The rescued girl and the 2 boys, aged 13, 14, and 16, reported that their parents had set out on a journey to the planet Sirius together with 3 other Sun Templars. and that this was their second attempt, as there had been mishaps during the first transit. The parents went to their deaths without having arranged the care of their previously stunned children. This last cult drama was also ritually enacted. The 5 Sun Templars perished at the beginning of spring on the day of the equinox, and set the house on fire with a time detonator. Testament of the Rosy Cross. The members left behind for the shocked world public testamentary press statements, manifestos and 2 videotapes inscribed with the title Testament of the Rosy Cross, and on which the Sun Templars who died in the collective acts of murder and suicide printed the message. We, faithful servants of the Rosy Cross, declare, just as we disappeared one day, we will return, for the Rose Cross is immortal. Like him we are from time immemorial and forever. Businessman and professional golfer Patrick Vunet, the 16th of December, 1995. His father, former 1960 Olympic ski racing champion Jean Vunet, knew of his son's and his own wife's involvement with the apocalyptic Sun Templar sect, delivered the last legacy letter of the chosen Jure and Di Membro to French Interior Minister Charles Pasqua. It said, I want you to know that where we will be, we will always hold out our arms to those who will be worthy to come to us. Investigation and trial investigators were able to prove that 38 of the 53 Sun Templars who died in Canada and Switzerland were murdered. Forensic medicine found morphine and the plant poison curare in all the bodies. The shooters and the perpetrators, who administered the anesthetic injections, could not be identified. Chief Public Prosecutor Lawrence spoke of unknown masterminds in the background and of potential clients for further Templar murders, and had a search carried out for 3 Mercedes limousines with Swiss license plates that had been seen near the scene of the crime. After the Sun Templar ritual murders, Michel Tabachnik, a well-known conductor with Swiss and French passports, was suspected of being the new Grand Master of the Sun Templars, which he denied. Tabachnik was charged with membership of a criminal organization, but acquitted for lack of evidence. Arrest and indictment in 2001. On the 11th of June, 1996, Michel Tabachnik was arrested in Nanterre, near Paris, and charged with membership of a criminal organization before the criminal court in Grenoble in 2001. The public prosecutor had demanded 5 years in prison without parole. The defense lawyer pleaded for acquittal. He had been classified as a theoretician of the sect and the number 3 in its hierarchy. As he could not be proven to be jointly responsible for the sect massacres due to lack of evidence, he was acquitted in the first instance on the 25th of June, 2001. Specifically, this trial was about the ritual murders between 1994 and 1997, in which a total of 74 cult members lost their lives, whereby the public prosecutor had accused Tabachnik of co-responsibility for all 74 ritual murders. Appeal proceedings in 2006 re-examinations of the 1995 victims allegedly revealed unusually high levels of phosphorus in the bodies. Alain Vunet, a son of Jean and Edith Vunet, concluded that the Sun Templars had been murdered with flamethrowers, and, together with the prosecution, brought an appeal against Tabachnik. In 2006, the public prosecutor's office in Grenoble opened the appeal proceedings and accused Tabachnik of having called in his writings for a flight to Sirius, that is to say suicide, thereby igniting a deadly dynamic among the Sun Templars. Specifically, the trial concerned the ritual murders of 16 Sun Templars, including 3 children, in December 1995 in the Vercors Massif near Grenoble. The defense did not contradict the prosecution's finding that the cultists were partially murdered. The Court of Appeal also acquitted Tabachnik of the charge of participation in a criminal organization. Conspiracy theories in the media. The German magazine Stern published an article in January 1996 that linked the Sun Templars to a network of conspiratorial connections. Since 1970, the esoteric order had been infiltrated by the right-wing radical secret society Service d'Action Civique SAC. The Stern quoted Massimo Introvigne as saying that it was likely that the OTS had been a religiously disguised cover organization of right-wing extremists. When the Sun Templars got out of control, the renegades were ruthlessly eliminated. British journalists David Carr Brown and David Cohen established links between the group and the following persons: Jean-Louis Mars, in August 1982, school friend and financial advisor to Prince Rainier of Monaco, Princess Gracia Patricia of Monaco, Grace Kelly. The 14th of September, 1982, Colette Diriel, French singer, friend of Gracia's. Marsan is said to have taken Princess Gracia to Luc Jouret in mid-1982 for a treatment that consisted of acupuncture and several rather dubious practices. Jouret allegedly demanded 20 million francs for the treatment, but did not receive it. The princess then died in a mysterious car accident. A film by Carr Brown and Cohen was broadcast on Channel 4 in Britain in 1997 and provoked outrage from the international tabloid press, which saw Grace Kelly's memory tarnished. Conspiracy theories flourished. First they wanted to make the Grimaldis untrustworthy before the people, then they wanted to drive Monaco into the arms of France. In Germany, the serious media did not pick up on the news.
And since the public media only brings short sensational reports, but never the entire true facts about any matter or event, the population hardly learns anything, if anything at all, about the effective background and connections and the effective truth. This is also a factor in the fact that there is not only a horrendous disorientation of the populations around the globe with regard to world events, and that this is being promoted more and more, but that this also leads to an indifference in every respect. And this indifference also relates to the disastrous sectarianism that runs through all religions with its deep human abysses, and especially in the case of the so-called Christian religion with all its hundreds of bellowing, stupid, primitive sects of all kinds, which have also crept into philosophies, esotericism, theosophy, and philanthropy, and so on.
A fact that unfortunately will not be changed in the foreseeable future, but is vehemently denied by the media to the contrary, which in this respect is proving to be the truth quite particularly in the USA with the dispute between the media and Donald Trump.
That is a good example, but now something regarding our correction work in the kitchen. If I remember correctly, it was you who ordered that only core group members should participate in the kitchen correction work because something untoward had happened? Or am I wrong?
What you say is correct. Also, that something unpleasant had happened, in the sense that non-core group members present at the correction work took in information, did not clearly understand its context, and misinterpreted everything elsewhere. This led to some nasty misunderstandings in private and passive group circles and to passive group resignations. This could result because the listeners did not know the contexts preceding the corrections. Consequently, the corrected passages could not be understood.
I can understand this, because it is the same everywhere in this relationship. As for example, when two or more persons have a conversation, in the middle of which others simply dare to listen, because they are not able to judge the conversation, because they do not know the parts of the conversation that were held before.
That is explained in an understandable way, so it should be understandable why I have made the arrangement, which should also be maintained.
I guess there is no need to change what has been decided. But how is it when permanent residents are involved in the correction work, as was also the case as per your commitment?
In the ongoing corrections, non-core group members who are always present should be able to remain so, because there is not only a listening in once in between, but there is a constant presence and thus also knowledge with regard to the previous texts, and everything can be understood.
Is clear to understand.